that? Do you know the boy? In the garden, but where? What is this called? Northbridge in Concord. That's the first battlefield. Yeah, see that? And this is like we on the side, but we overlook down there. Look at that bridge over there.
Oh, the camp. Cool, right?
Wow, look at that. So from our house, we got here in 15 minutes. But because COVID and the boy wanted to go, so we have to wait for a bit. Isn't that awesome? Big field. We're the first battle. This is connecting. Going.
We're going to do bridge. We're going to do bridge.
Not bridge. What is it here?
What's in the battlefield?
Yeah, the battlefield.
Where they fight. I think they fight.
Where they fought?
Fought. Yeah. Fought.
With who?
England, I think. I don't remember.
Yeah, with England.
Yes. Yes.
Nothing wrong. Nobody's ever said.
I'm sure they fight with England.
Yep.
Look up there.
Yep. Oh, look up there.
We've been walking for 1.4 miles.
Oh, that's a long walk. So look at the monument here.
The 19th of April.
19th of April.
The battlefield going on for 100 years.
Yeah. Oh.
Then they stopped. Then the July 4th, 19, I think, 8.
Reading information. Let's see what it's saying here. So that you can read. The river and the bridge. The river. So nice. Wanna jump? Beautiful bridge.
I am not gonna. I hope you know in the middle.
This bridge is like Vietnam bridge.
Oh, never mind.
It's so beautiful. River here. Nice river.
Oh my God, man, how are you not scared?
How beautiful it is. The boy never walked on the bridge with water underneath. Really scared. What's this here?
I don't
The
know.
area where what?
Where the old mates. Old mates. I don't know.
This is where they fight.
The first, I think the first.
The first gunshot is here.
Hey, look, we can go back here in October and it can open up.
Yeah. They're not open now, everyone, just out there.
Wanted to crash on the bridge. She said, let us stand our ground. If we die, let us die here. Something like that. Oh my god, she's off the boat. Blah blah blah. So you know,
Oh, they watch from outside of their window.
ooh, snipers. I met people that shoot you. Woo. Can we go up to that house and see if there's anybody inside of it?
No.
Knock on the window?
Trời ơi, no. That's scary. Look at that there. That's the field, and there's no people cutting grass or anything down here. So it's all because the pandemic, so nobody cutting the grass around here.
Oh, guess what? Knock, knock. Who's there?
And that is it.
Knock, knock. Who's there? A gun that's pointing out at you.
Yeah. Scary, but it's very historic.
I think so. That's not like what Maybe with the British soldiers. Being 3,000 miles and died. Out among the snow, Concord, beyond the ocean tide. Here's English mother made her moan. April 1979. Oh, wonder what happened here. I mean, I know what happened here.
1775.
And they walked 3,000 miles.
Wow.
It tells you about the story about how the little tiny red people came over here and how they got here. Wow, they were not that far from the Brit. I mean, yeah, they're pretty close to each other.
Yeah. That's the monument.
Something. And the person who wrote it was Alan French. They're fine. The person who wrote it. I'm a student.
Yeah, so it's hard to read, so I'm gonna take a picture so people can read it in here.
Oh wait. Let me go cover the sun so you guys can read it.
No, that's okay. I can take a picture. What's that?
Wait, why is it not going out?
No, it will turn more. The other way.
What does that do?
It's supposed to have a tiny little thing coming out there.
Okay. Okay, let me read that thing. Ooh, wow, I love that. That's the bridge that we passed.
Yeah, and then when they died, when they walked 3,000 miles, because those guys. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Just one across the other.
Yeah, but colonials won in the British.
Just like the pig.
All right, well, I do have 11:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning once again. Welcome to Minuteman National Historical Park on this fine September day. We're finally getting into some weather that's comfortable. Most of the summer was either raining or brutally hot. So certainly glad to be doing a talk on a day like today. And this is North Bridge History and Memory. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens here at the bridge. Certainly you want to have that background, and then how we remember what happened at the bridge, because very often the stories we tell reflect the generation telling them as much as they represent the subjects of the stories. Even the monuments we have here tell as much about the people who erected them as they do about the people and events they supposedly commemorate and represent. So our story that we tell in the park is mostly a 24-hour story from the evening of April 18th to the evening of April 19th. In some ways, it started 10 years before that, as the British came into Boston to kind of reinforce British imperial policy, taxation, what the colonists would refer to as taxation without representation. So there's been 10 years of impose a tax, protest a tax, repeal a tax, rinse and repeat, until the tea tax was the last one standing. And incidentally, we actually made the tea cheaper than the smuggled tea. But as a matter of principle, many of the colonists were boycotting that. And as you may recall, on the night of December 16th of 1773, a group of Mohawk Indians, who fooled absolutely nobody, by the way, dumped 340 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. This was actually kind of a tipping point, as Parliament responded with the coercive acts, which included the Massachusetts Government Act banning most town meetings. But the lawyers among the colonists noticed a loophole that it did not ban county meetings. And it also closed the port of Boston, which was a great economic pinch to Massachusetts Bay. And the king himself, at that point, became much more hardline in his own opposition to what was happening here in the colonies. So everybody knew that tensions were reaching a boiling point. It was maybe just a matter of when. The colonists started storing supplies and arms to raise an army of 15,000 men. This is in addition to the private arms that everybody had, because everybody needed to be in the militia. And they started forming their own governing bodies, kind of illegally or extra-legally. The provincial congress actually often met here in Concord, a shire town for Middlesex. And the Committee of Safety in particular was operating out of Concord down at Wright's Tavern in the center of town. And this is the base of operations, both political and military. I think it's important to remember that this idea of defending our rights, liberty, was not some newfangled thing in opposition to an absolute tyranny. Britain hasn't been an absolute tyranny for centuries, maybe. And any time they tried, they got slapped down pretty hard. In a lot of ways, the colonies managed to free themselves from what was already the freest polity on the face of the earth. They already had their rights, thank you very much. We're just trying to protect them. And because of that, they had the militia to defend the frontier, which is almost exclusively until the French and British Imperial regular army came over to North America. And they also had their colonial assemblies for internal affairs, which were the bodies that they were expecting taxation to come from, at least internal taxation. So a political and a military infrastructure was already in place here. Now they did enhance it. They did start redirecting the taxes to the provincial congress. They did start enhancing their militias, and in some cases forming minute companies. Certain towns who were willing to pay for it heeded the provincial congress's call to form minute companies who were better trained, better equipped, usually in better shape. So by the time we get to April of 1775, so much had already gone on. 1774 had been a year of preparation. Our history textbooks usually have this way of jumping from the Tea Party to April 19th as if they happened within a week of each other. It was actually, of course, a year plus. So as these colonists were secretly storing supplies, General Gage, who was both the commander-in-chief of His Majesty's forces in North America and now colonial governor of Massachusetts, was getting nervous. But he was also a man of the rule of law and was not going to jump the gun. Now, he was under pressure from his superiors in London, particularly Lord Dartmouth, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, to do something about what was roiling in the colonies, preferably before it could be used against the British Army. So, well, everything that tries to go under the radar doesn't always turn out that way, because the colonies were secretly gathering supplies. To which the British response is to secretly plan a mission out to Concord to try to collect the supplies, some of which at least had been stolen from them first, to be fair. And then the Sons of Liberty, having found out about this secret expedition to Concord, secretly put together an alarm system, kind of the 1770s equivalent of a telephone tree, to raise the alarm throughout the countryside and tell the entire province about the secret British plan to come out to Concord. Have you noticed how I've used the word secret in the last paragraph? Yeah. Boston, a then smaller town, still one of the largest in the colonies, but 15,000 souls on the Boston Neck, very tiny geographically at the time, was, and I like to say in many ways still is, a town that talked. And in fact, when Earl Percy, who would later lead the relief column, came to General Gage and said, "Hey, I heard some guys talking smack on the wharf about how you're going to go out to Concord." And they said, "Oh, you're going to miss your mark. Because guess what? We've already further hidden the stuff because of a previous alarm system told us to." Gates said, "Concord? You heard Concord. Isn't that interesting? You know, Earl Percy, I told a grand total of 2 people my exact plans. My soldiers, even my designated commanders, don't know yet exactly what I have in mind. Oh, and by the way, Earl Percy, one of those 2 people was you." So Gage has now already figured out they've been made. But he decides to go through with it anyway because he's afraid that if he doesn't do something now, things are going to get worse. So about 10 o'clock at night on April 18th. It's a Tuesday night. Happens to be the first Tuesday following Easter that year. General Gage has Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith and Major John Pitcairn rouse the troops in bed, about 700-800 out of the 4,000 garrison in Boston at the time. He says, "We gotta go. Well, don't worry, we'll tell you where. Just for now, let's get ourselves across the Charles River, a wide spot in the river, which is now the Back Bay of Boston. And it takes about 4 hours to row across, wade across, then the marshes of Cambridge. And meanwhile, Paul Revere and William Dawes mount their respective horses, get out of town a lot more quickly, a couple of guys on a horse versus 700 or 800 going across the river. And the alarm spreads. And long story short, Paul Revere and William Dawes actually get detained in just beyond Lexington. Paul Dawes turns back. Paul Revere is interrogated for a bit and later let go. It's actually Samuel Prescott, a Concord native who was out courting his girlfriend in Lexington, who meets up with them and manages to carry the alarm out to Concord and also further west. So that is how Concord becomes alarmed and the neighboring towns become alarmed. So in the wee hours of the morning, or very early morning hours, they're ready for the British. British come in about 7 o'clock in the morning. You got 400, 450 colonial from Concord and the immediately surrounding towns versus the 700-800 British. So right now, 2-to-1 numerical advantage British. The colonials basically serve as a welcoming committee. They almost escort the British into town because this is an observation. This is an observation mission at this point on the colonial side. They see the British coming in. They say, "Okay, this is what they're going to do. We're going to back up over the hill here." So it's actually the colonials that first cross the North Bridge and gather up on the hill beyond our visitor center to observe the action, and keeping in mind fewer trees at the time, easier to see the center of town from here, and we're actually a little bit on the low side in terms of the ground. But it's an area where they could see at least the top of the center of town. And so the British come in, they do a little bit of divide and conquer. Some stay in the center of town, some go over the North Bridge, some guard it, same for the South Bridge. Those headed over the North Bridge are headed to Barrett's farm. Colonel James Barrett, the Middlesex Regiment colonel, who's personally storing some of the supplies, because some intelligence actually worked. And they left 96 of their comrades to actually guard the bridge for safe passage back when the time came. So this is all being observed by the colonial militia. But what also happens is in the center of town, smoke rises. Why? Because the British found a few supplies in the center of town, and they started to burn them. And the sparks jump onto the public buildings, setting them on fire. Not part of the plan. In fact, the British are talked into putting out the fire at that point. But Lieutenant Joseph Hosmer, who's up on the hill with the militia, goes to his commander and says, will you let them burn the town down? Because that's what it kind of looks like. And now, oh, by the way, Lieutenant Hosmer happens to live in the center of town. So the subtext here is, are you going to let them burn my house down? No. So we have a little bit of nervousness, tension, maybe the blood pressure rising a little bit as we see what may or may not be happening there. Meanwhile, a rider comes in by the name of Reuben Brown, who had been sent out to scout out the British progress. He comes huffing and puffing on his horse back from Lexington. And he says, you won't believe what I just witnessed. The regular troops fired into our militia in Lexington. He's asked, was anybody killed? He says, I don't know, but I think probably. Oh, great. Now we have bloodshed. Now we have a body count. This wasn't anybody's plan on either side. Colonel Barrett, who is on the field here, but kind of a lead from the rear type of guy, he says, all right, we're going to march down to the bridge, but don't fire unless first fired upon. And the Colonials do so, marching down basically the path the park uses to get up to the visitor center now. They confront the British on the bridge. Now, keep in mind the numerical advantage has changed. 400 some odd Colonials to only 96 British on the bridge. Those who have gone over to Barrett's farm are a mile and a half of the way. They're out of the picture at this point. So 400 versus 96, well-trained, well-drilled, not the professional army, but a lot better than the British Army were bargaining for. They were not just embattled farmers not knowing what they were doing. They were not just everybody grabbing muskets to see what happens. This was a well-regulated militia that had been drilling. Some of them were in minute companies. Both sides had a few French and Indian veterans. Both sides had most of the British Army was technically a peacetime army at this point. Both sides used similar weapons. Both sides used the same manual of arms. This was a lot more evenly matched than the David versus Goliath narrative probably gives it credit for. Except at the moment, again, 96 to 400. So we may want to reconsider who's David and who's Goliath at this point. So they confront each other across the bridge. Captain Laurie on the British side, not exactly the most decisive man in the world. But one of his soldiers fires across without orders. More firing from the British side. And the first shots land in the water. Colonials think maybe they're warning shot. But then they come straight across the bridge. And Major Buttrick, who by the way we're on his property, or they are over there anyway, lives across the street from the visitor center. He's the one who realizes that Barrett's condition of unless first fired upon has been met. So he says, for God's sakes, fellow soldiers, fire. Well, this is 2 minutes that's going to change at least this day, if not the course of history. Because Major Buttrick just committed treason, technically. And he suborned others to do so as well. Remember, these are all loyal British subjects, at least on paper. And he ordered a firing into His Majesty's troops. Captain Isaac Davis and Abner Hosmer of Acton are the first to fall. They're up front because Captain Isaac Davis basically volunteered. He said, I have a man who's afraid to go, and we have the bayonet, so we'll go first. What do you think happens when you volunteer to go in the front line in a combat situation? So the Colonials do respond. They fire into the British, and the British, a couple of them fall. A couple die instantly, and a few others are wounded. And this is all over in a matter of a couple of minutes. And then the British soldiers, still shocked beyond belief that they were confronted this way, they are the ones that turn around very disorderly, very undignified, and they run. across the manse field and back to the center of town, with quite the story to tell. And that brings us to how we remember this, because there is, of course, the running battle that lasts the rest of the day. But this is all in the 9 o'clock hour. So many of the individual skirmishes that we represent here only take a couple minutes apiece. They run back to town, certainly with a story to tell. They'll all leave town with only mixed success at best, a little before noon. Once everybody comes back over, the guys who went to Barrett's Farm find the bridge unguarded, but also not being held by anybody else, so they just, come on over. Colonials do pursue, but do not fire any more shots. Keep in mind, nobody woke up this morning expecting to start a war. Nobody woke up this morning saying, let's raise the body count as much as possible. Nobody woke up this morning saying, let's shed as much blood as possible. In fact, everybody would have assumed there are no bodies and no blood. Both sides. And certainly nobody's thinking, we're going to get our independence out of this. Well, there were those 2 second cousin rebels in Boston by the name of Adams. Maybe they thought they'd get their independence out of this. But for the most part, no. So how is this remembered? Well, for starters, back to the manse here. The resident at the time was the Reverend William Emerson, who was the pastor of the town, an ardent Whig, as we call him, to have a little bit more of a neutral term besides rebel or patriot. And he was one of the first to answer the alarm, despite being exempt as clergy. And certainly he told his stories to his son, who was young at the time, and later passed on to his grandson. His grandson is Ralph Waldo Emerson, the poet. And Ralph Waldo Emerson certainly has made a contribution to this site, because he wrote the Concord hymn, the first stanza of which goes, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmers stood, and fired the shot heard round the world. Now that is engraved in the Minuteman statue across the river from here. And it also gives us kind of the imagery that has come down to us. First of all, the shot heard round the world that continues to reverberate. Not the first shots of the day. Those were fired in Lexington. This was the first ordered command from a colonial officer to fire back into His Majesty's troops. And even the bridge itself, the imagery comes from Emerson. This was not the original bridge. It's about the 5th or 6th on the site. We do have a plank of the original up at the visitor center. But this bridge would have been flatter, making it easier to fire across than maybe it looks now. But the poem said the rude bridge arched the flood. So we have the arch. And in fact, there was no bridge there at all from the 1790s until 1875, because the road network was rerouted across modern Monument Street. But when the Centennial was coming along, the historically minded locals thought there should be a bridge there. So they put back a bridge, an arched bridge, apparently. The Minuteman statue was also erected for 1875. Daniel Chester Brent was the sculptor. He is a Concord resident. This is one of his first pieces of public art, one of his last pieces, but actually defeated Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial in D.C. And it's actually made of melted down Confederate cannon. No, there was no interregional tweaking there or anything. Earlier in 1836, before there was another bridge here, everything took place over here. So we erected this obelisk in 1836. And it's very patriotic, refers to the first forcible resistance against an occupying British army. Gage might have had a little bit to say about that spin. We turned them back. Anything that comes in the 1820s, 1830s, you have to be a little skeptical of. That was really the rah-rah period where I think there was some revisionist history going on. But in contrast to that, the boulder right here with the plaque actually facing away from it, that was put up in the 20th century. And it talks about the rendering of 2 kindred nations long since united in peace. And as I'm sure you're aware, we are at this point very close allies with the United Kingdom. I usually just like to extend the mother country metaphor, since colonies are dependent on their mother country, just as children are dependent on their parents when they're growing up, and then maybe they rebel a little bit and separate in their teenage years, and maybe cause their parents all sorts of grief, depending on the family. But then when they become adults, they return and become best friends with their parents. So I think the metaphor works all the way through. And then finally, as a way to point out that this is really sanctified ground. The 2 British soldiers that died here instantly have never left. They are buried on the other side. That is a grave. Their bodies actually might be a few feet in front of it, but that is maintained by the park with the Union Jacks. The 2 that fell here instantly are buried here. You may also find along the Battle Road Trail boulders about this high with Union Jacks that say near here are buried British soldiers. So this does make this a sacred spot as well. So with that kind of wraps up and concludes my formal presentation. It is Tuesday, a slightly light day at the park programming wise. There is another program at 1:30 that meets at the top in front of the visitor center and walks down to the bridge and talks a little bit. There's some content overlap with this, but it also talks a lot about domestic concerns, family life concerns, and decisions that were made in real time, given the information they had. And then later on at the other visitor center about 6 miles east of here at 3:15 is a walk out to the Parker's Revenge area. The Lexington militia came back and ambushed the British later in the afternoon. So those are your other programming options for the day if you are. With that, I would thank you for visiting, and if there is any questions,
Thank you. Thank you. This is the bridge that he was talking about. Flower.
Flower. Oh, flower. Do we have these at home?
I think they wire flower.
Yeah, but Daddy said we have
Those
these.
are the memorial that he was talking about it too. 2 men was dying. That is right under, like about 100 feet away from the bridge here. Yeah, the bridge. All right, let's go, Bryn. That was a good, right?
Oh my God.
That was a good talk. It's very nice.
My grandpa's getting the flowers.
Oh my goodness. Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that a nice bridge? It's like
Yeah.
Vietnam bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you go to Vietnam, you see a lot of bridges like this. Make out of wood. Look at the river. Beautiful, nice, peaceful. This. And where you see the group of people was sitting down there, that where we was. All right, let's go, Bren.
And they do learn the people behind them.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. What a great day to see.